Hello, Richard.
Hello, Jackie.
Welcome to Blogging Heads TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to viewers who may not be familiar with your work?
Sure, thanks. I'm Richard Parker. I'm the executive director of a new project called the American Foreign Policy Project, which convenes top diplomats, experts, scholars from around the country to work collaboratively, both in person and online, to develop sound policies on some of the toughest foreign policy issues. We've been working for about 15 months now on what to do about Iran. It's been a very labor-intensive exercise, and we've come out with two statements. One, a joint expert statement on Iran that we released last November, and more recently just released a new white paper on what to do about the Iran nuclear challenge, and that's what we'd like to talk about today.
So we've had some gentle, friendly disagreements over how the information on Iran is evaluated and what to make of it. Maybe we should start by talking about that, how we evaluate differently some of the information, and take it from there. Would that be okay with you?
Sure, that sounds fine. Let me add, by the way, that if people want a copy of our statement, it can be found at www.americanforeignpolicy.org.
Okay.
All one word, americanforeignpolicy.org. Should have a little card here to hold up. But you can find a lot more details about where we're coming from there. Let me just say up front that...
well, just one thing about the links to things. I think what we'll do, I think when the dialogue is posted, there will be links on the right to any document that we mention. So you might want to keep track of things that you mention, and you can send the links off to Blogging Heads TV, and they'll be sure to put them all in one place.
Great idea.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, one thing we need to clarify at the outset, and I think this is something that you and I probably agree on, is that the current leadership of Tehran is a hard bunch to like. The human rights record of the current regime is poor to abysmal. They persecute dissidents. They are shutting down press. Every succeeding election seems to get a little bit less free than the last. Although their electoral process is still somewhat more open than many other Middle East states that we're not in conflict with. Their statements about Israel are abhorrent, and we don't approve of any of that stuff. But the question is not really, do we like the current leadership or do we like the current government? The question is, how do you advance American foreign policy interests? And that's what we want to focus on.
Right, so we're stipulating at the outset that we are not apologists for Ahmadinejad or the actions of the Iranian government. So that's
also important to remember that Ahmadinejad does not really call the shots on nuclear and foreign policy in Iran. That is really the prerogative of the Supreme National Security Council, headed, of course, by the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, who, by the way, has been in power for a long time, is not going up for election in June of 2009, will remain in power and will remain the Supreme Leader no matter who is elected. And who has shown over the years to be both no friend rhetorically of the United States or Israel, but also a much more cautious and pragmatic individual who is not messianic, not suicidal, but has shown distinctly self-interested and often quite cautious patterns of behavior. So it's really important to keep in mind, behind all the vituperative rhetoric and the grandstanding for the Arab masses and so forth, who actually calls the shots in Iran? It's not Ahmadinejad.
That's certainly true. I think on the nuclear issue, it's certainly correct that the Supreme Leader is calling the shots behind the scenes, and Iran has, over the last actually several decades, I think it's fair to say, has pursued a very deliberate path toward achieving what I believe is clearly a nuclear weapons capability, if not an actual bomb in the basement. Is that something that you would agree with?
Well, I think you have to be very careful about what you define as a nuclear weapons capability, because it is often used in a way that suggests intent that is not clear. The fact of the matter is, as you know, Jackie, that enrichment is the hardest thing to do en route to getting a bomb. And so from the standpoint of just the technicalities, learning how to enrich uranium is the biggest hurdle that one faces in getting a bomb, right? So if learning how to enrich is pursuing a nuclear weapons capability, then Iran is quite clearly pursuing a nuclear weapons capability. In fact, I would go further. I would say they have a nuclear weapons capability because they know how to enrich uranium. But enriching uranium is also something that is done for peaceful purposes. It's permitted by the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It's legal, provided it's done under safeguards, as Iran is now doing. So it's a very hard thing to just say, thou shalt not enrich. And it's a very hard thing to do empirically to say that if you're enriching, you're therefore pursuing a nuclear weapon.
I would agree with that. So here's the deal. Iran is doing a couple of things, right? It's developing the full nuclear fuel cycle in compliance with International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards, with inspections, with cameras, with monitoring. And it is all, and I would argue it is also, until very recently, and possibly continuing in a covert way, however, it has also pursued research and development toward a weaponization capability. And I think it's really important not to overlook that Iran has not come clean with the IAEA about its past work, very specific work, and there's very compelling evidence, I believe, that Iran has conducted serious research into how to take fissile material and weaponize it into a deliverable missile or bomb.
Yes, that's true. But as always, the facts are a little more complex than that. There are real grounds for concerns with Iran's nuclear program. Let's make no mistake about it. They were caught basically red-handed in the 2002-2003 period, enriching uranium without declaring it to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Well, just to clarify what they did back then in 2002. They were beginning to test some centrifuges that they had set up a small test stand at an undisclosed facility that the IAEA was unaware of, and they had begun to introduce uranium hexafluoride into some centrifuges. They weren't really enriching on a grand scale,
right.
which they are right now.
Fair point. But they were pursuing it. It was I think this was a violation of their safeguards agreement.
It was, and there were the violations amounted to introducing the uranium hexafluoride into the centrifuges, but also not declaring to the IAEA that it had acquired that UF6 from China, right. I believe, in the early 90s.
Right. Well, let's be clear that so far none of what they did, the activities were not themselves a violation. It was the failure to report them that was the violation.
Well, doing them. I mean, yeah. Okay. Well, because they were doing the enrichment outside of IAEA safeguards, so the act of enrichment in that case was a violation of safeguards.
Right. And then when they were caught, they basically came clean about the enrichment and said, we will accept a full IAEA safeguards over these enrichment plants.
Well, not so fast. They came clean eventually, but they stalled a long time. They didn't let the IAEA into that facility where the test stands had been set up, and then when the IAEA did finally get in, they found that Iran had scrubbed the place quite clean. So there was definitely some obstruction of inspection in the 2003.
Yes, well, I mean, we can go into the sort of the micro details if you like, but the bottom line is that their enrichment is now, as far as I understand it, is under IAEA safeguards and is in compliance with the rules. And their facilities are declared. The material that is in these facilities, all the material that has caused the worldwide alarms is now under IAEA safeguards. It's under seal. It's fully accounted for. It takes the form of low-enriched uranium that is not suitable for weapons use.
Right. But there's a big but to all of that.
There's a big but, and I think where you're coming from is a series of documents that came through.
No, I wasn't going to get to the documents. I was going to.
Oh, you weren't.
No, the big but, yes. Everything is flowers and loveliness with the IAEA safeguards in Iran. There are inspectors ongoing to Natanz, and the material is safeguarded and accounted for not only at Natanz but also at Esfahan, where the uranium ore is converted into uranium hexafluoride gas, which is used in the centrifuges at Natanz. The big but is that Iran does not adhere to the additional protocol, which would allow the IAEA to have access to facilities where there may not be nuclear material, but where there is centrifuge production, storage, design, research. So it's possible, it's entirely possible that Iran could have built a centrifuge enrichment facility and have it be technically legal, but that the IAEA is entirely unaware of.
Well, this is of course the entire point of our report, and it's the chief irony that we point out in our report, that the West has become so obsessed with this open, safeguarded enrichment that is under seal at Natanz, and this building of a heavy water reactor, which is also fully declared in Iraq, that they have completely lost sight of, and they've what we believe is the greater risk if you think that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, which is the possibility of some clandestine program across the length and breadth of Iran.
Right.
So for us, the greater risk is clandestine, and if you don't trust Iran, the Bush administration approach is the dumbest approach you can think of, because it basically says we're going to focus obsessively on getting you to stop enrichment openly and under safeguards, but we have no plan for getting you to adhere to the additional protocol, which is, by the way, voluntary. It can't be compelled, unfortunately. It should be differently under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but that's the case.
Right. But okay,
and so we're left sort of blind, deaf, and dumb about what's happening elsewhere in Iran. And we believe that a far smarter diplomacy would trade off some flexibility on open, safeguarded, legal enrichment, which Iran is entitled to do, and they never tire of pointing that out, in exchange for readherence to the additional protocol, which they, just to back up a second, as you know, Iran had voluntarily implemented the additional protocol after signing but not ratifying it some years ago.
Right.
And then when they were sent to the Security Council,
they voluntarily adhered to it for a period of somewhat less than 2 years, or around 2 years.
Right. And then they withdrew. And I think we can only speculate about their reasons. There may be malign, or there may just be this feeling that, look, we tried to accommodate these people. We got nothing but calls for regime change and further concessions.
Right.
So why should we play ball with these people?
I just want to make
I just want to say that Iran has basically said, at least in informal dialogues, that they would be willing to resubscribe to the additional protocol, accept anywhere, anytime inspections of the IAEA inspectors across Iran, nuclear facilities across Iran, declared or undeclared. And they might be willing to go further. They might be willing to accept technicians on the ground. They might be willing to accept remote camera surveillance. They've left the door open to all of that. What they have not left the door open to is saying, thou shalt not ever enrich anything on Iranian soil.
I just want to back up for the... Sometimes terms like additional protocol, they make people's eyes glaze over. It certainly makes my eyes glaze over, additional protocol. So we'll put a link up to a definition of what the additional protocol is. But in short, it is a widely adhered to, increasingly political scientists like to use the term norm. It's a widely adhered to addition to safeguards. There are... approximately 130 countries that have signed the additional protocol now. Many of these countries don't have any or very minimal nuclear programs, civilian programs. But nevertheless, this is just something that's kind of become standard operating procedure now with countries. I think there are 130 or 131 signatories, and slightly fewer have actually ratified the additional protocol, but sort of it's in place to happen. So this is there are about 190 countries in the UN. So this is a very broadly adhered to sort of international norm. The fact that Iran...
But you have to understand, Jackie, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Brazil has not adhered to the additional protocol.
Brazil is an outlier on the additional
even
protocol.
Though they are enriching uranium. So there are countries that assert their rights to enrich uranium without adhering to the protocol. There
are countries that are outside of this entirely, like India, Pakistan, and Israel. Yeah. So Brazil's an outlier, but they have other reasons which are outside. Their stated reasons for not adhering to the additional protocol have to do with technical proprietary data. I'm not saying that those are valid reasons, but I think Brazil is a separate and special case.
But I think you have to look at this. It is often important not to sympathize with your adversary, but to understand where your adversary is coming from, in order to accurately gauge their intentions, if for no other reason. If you look at it from Iran's perspective, and this is what Iran says, look, you have countries like Israel and India and Pakistan, who have not only not even joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, they have gotten bombs, and you're not talking about sanctioning them. Why are we being singled out for, enriching, which is one of our rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, by the way, we have joined? And why are we being forced to subscribe to this additional protocol, which is a protocol that none of these other countries have even thought about subscribing to? So, it's very important in diplomacy to understand the big picture. And when the other side has made a decent point, to recognize it as that and not continually drink one's own moonshine.
All right, can we go back to the issue of weaponization for a second? When you read, for example, the IAEA in February of 2008 gave a briefing to member states laying out some of the information that showed Iran had pursued this weaponization effort, and some of it is really quite compelling. Among I think that the biggest thing people point to that kind of raises the alarms is research that indicates they were studying an explosive device that would explode at an altitude of about 600 meters. And the IAEA, in the course of this briefing, notes that this altitude excludes the possibility that conventional explosives or chemical or biological weapons could have been under development here. Mm-hmm. When you is it so easy to cast that aside? I mean, and there's other documents too that kind of show other pieces of a nuclear weapon. But what do you make? I mean, it feels to me a little bit naive to be debating about the additional protocol sometimes, when it's, to me, compelling that Iran has thought seriously about how to take fissile material and weaponize it.
Well, I think that's true. There are real grounds for concern there. I think that the evidence you're referring to is now the so-called alleged documents that the IAEA refers to that were surfaced by Western intelligence, and which did show that up until late 2003, maybe early 2004, Iran at least had been pursuing a weapons program. I should say that Iran says that these documents are forgeries. We've heard conflicting reports about whether the documents have ever been shown to Iran in their originals. I've certainly never been able to see them. The public has never seen these documents. We just sort of take the word of the intelligence community about what these documents say.
Well, wait, that's going a little far. I mean, the IAEA has the documents, and the IAEA has briefed Iran on the content of the documents. My understanding is that they can't turn over a full set of the documents to Iran because of the need to protect methods and sources and not compromise people who may have had a role in surfacing these documents.
Well, that may be. But the fact is that, as any trained lawyer knows, when you can't inspect the evidence, that does present certain problems of proof. And this is not to say that the documents are forgeries. I'm not making that allegation. I'm just saying that there does remain some residual uncertainty about them. And there are reports from Gareth Porter in the press service, based on interviews that he reports having with IAEA staff, that record some doubt about the possible authenticity of some of these documents. But I'd like to actually just stipulate for the purposes of this conversation that those documents are valid in terms of what they show. I think it's important, basically after Iraq, to be very circumspect about interpreting evidence, and yet you have to tread carefully there. That's all I want to emphasize.
Okay, all right. And the only thing I would just say is that I think the IAEA did a masterful job of very quickly disputing the Niger documents and has not come forward with concerns.
Well,
the Gareth Porter thing. I've read the Gareth Porter piece like 4 times, and I still don't really follow exactly what he's talking about. Anyway, well, we can put a link up to it, and people can make.
Well, the fact that the IAEA was able to catch a really crude forgery doesn't mean that there aren't other. Yeah. But the main thing is to focus on what our own intelligence community reports, which is that they feel that these documents are authentic, and that Iran really did have a weapons program, and they have reported in 2007. And reaffirmed in February of 2009, Dennis Blair reaffirmed that they have pretty high confidence that Iran did have a weapons program up until the fall of 2003, but then suspended it with no evidence of a restart.
That's not quite accurate. No evidence of a restart.
Well, they have not surfaced any affirmative evidence of a restart. Have you seen such evidence?
Actually, what Blair says is, we don't have sufficient intelligence reporting to judge confidently whether Tehran is, basically, he's saying we don't have enough intelligence to know one way or the other. He said in his testimony whether Tehran is willing to maintain indefinitely the halt of its previously enumerated nuclear weapons-related activities, or whether it will or already has set specific deadlines that will prompt it to restart these activities. So,
Jack, this is significant. I mean, at the American Foreign Policy Project, we like to follow the evidence, and if you have evidence that Iran has restarted a program, I would love to see it.
Well, the other thing that's interesting in the Blair statement is that he sets the date up until which they're confident of what Iran's been doing. He says, we assess Tehran has not restarted these activities as of at least mid-2007. And he's giving this testimony in early 2009. So for like a year and a half, the U.S. intelligence community really has no idea what Iran's doing. I mean, I just find that curious.
Well,
I
think that
these words are very carefully chosen and vetted. And I find that very, very interesting, date.
Right.
set.
Well, I'm not sure how much you can draw from that. I think he's probably just repeating the findings of the December 2007 report, which would make a mid-2007 cutoff for gathering evidence.
Right. But for the next...
And so all he's saying is that, look, we're not making any new finding here. We're just reaffirming, and we're standing by the report that we issued in December 2007,
right,
which came under criticism,
right,
that we don't have evidence of a restart. Now, I think if they did have recently surfaced evidence of a restart, unless there was some compelling reason why they couldn't disclose it, they would disclose it, right? Or at least they would say that they had it.
I would just add that he also says, we assess Iran has the scientific, technical, and industrial capacity eventually to produce nuclear weapons.
Oh, sure. There's no question about that. And they have advanced that capacity steadily through the Bush administration, through years of sanctions, through years of threats. They have continually advanced their capacity. A great deal of time has been lost, which might have been better used in preventing that.
Maybe we should sort of shift, away from the discussion of the evidence to kind of what to do about it. Do you want to sort of?
Sure.
Because I think
sure.
that's also
I think there is one element that where it kind of shades over, evidence shades over in the policy, and that is the question of well, if you don't know, I mean, all we're trying to say in our project is, don't be so sure of yourself. Has the experience of Iraq taught us nothing? People who just know that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons should be asked for their evidence. And the question is, if you don't know what their intentions are, is it prudent to err in the side of the worst case scenario? Do you want to assume the worst? In other words, is that the best way to protect yourself? And our view is that if you don't know, the right response to uncertainty is not to assume the worst, because if you're wrong, you provoke a confrontation needlessly. And even if you're right, to pin them to the wall on this and to say, we accuse you of pursuing nuclear weapons, and therefore you must stop all enrichment, puts them in a position where if they do stop enrichment, they've therefore confessed to pursuing nuclear weapons. It denies them any face-saving way to give you what you want. So it's not prudent diplomacy, particularly to publicly assume the worst, when you don't have the evidence to back it up. I think much more prudent is to do what the P5 did, which was say, we have these concerns, and we'd like you we'd like you to provide some reassurance about them. But stop all the talk about got to stop Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons. They don't. They are. In fact, they've repeatedly said that they're not pursuing weapons and that this is against Islam, which is a flourish that I can't imagine them actually adding if they really were pursuing weapons. But maybe it's just good cover. Who knows?
All right. Okay. Well, I guess we can agree to disagree. I mean, I just take a slightly less sanguine view of their intentions and their capabilities. But
we don't take a sanguine view. We just try to take a pragmatic view. The question is, what do you accomplish by accusing them publicly of pursuing nuclear weapons when you don't have evidence?
Well, one thing you can accomplish is urging Iran to create more transparency over its program. Make available to the IAEA the people who are behind this research and development. The IAEA has been requesting repeatedly permission to speak with key individuals who have allegedly engaged in this research. So let the IAEA talk to them. I mean, address the issues, address the fundamental underlying questions that remain outstanding. That's one thing.
Yes, and that gets into what should be the object of diplomacy going forward. I mean,
right.
I think we agree that telling Iran you must stop the pursuit of nuclear weapons is not a useful diplomatic bargaining objective because it's not an observable behavior, right?
Okay.
You have to. But the question is then, okay, do you then say, all right, Iran, we want you to answer all these questions about these past programs, and we really can't go forward until we get answers to these about these past programs. We want to know what you were doing back in 2003, and we're going to stop everything until you come clean about that. I mean, from the standpoint of a pursuit of truth, I can't query that. But again, from the standpoint of pragmatic diplomacy, which is more important? Forcing them to answer what may be potentially embarrassing questions about their past, or safeguarding the future. We believe
both,
it's more important to safeguard the future.
I think both are really important, and actually, I would disagree with you. I think the diplomacy that the European three, the EU three, which has kind of been leading diplomacy with Iran over the last 5 years, I think it's been marvelously pragmatic. I think that the diplomatic offer that was made to Iran in May of 2008 was a beautiful work of pragmatism. It was saying, you want nuclear reactors? We're going to give you nuclear reactors. We'll help you build them. We'll help you finance them. We'll open up trade and development incentives in other areas, oil and gas, infrastructure, what you name it. And if you want to enrich, eventually down the road, you want to produce fuel for your own reactors, that's okay. We can talk about that then. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's build the nuclear reactor infrastructure that you would need to actually sustain and make viable an enrichment effort. So I think that is pretty pragmatic, and I think that actually going forward, I mean, I can't guess I don't know what the Obama administration is going to do in this respect, but my hunch is that whatever comes out of this deliberative process that's underway now or may have just been completed, I believe that this will be a cornerstone of it. That we have to push forward this notion of enrichment in Iran. First, Iran would have to build the nuclear power capability that could support the argument for enrichment. That's just my hunch.
Well, you put an awful lot on the table there, Jackie. We were talking about just this limited question of whether Iran should be forced to come clean about all its past activities as a precondition of going forward. And I believe that that's not particularly constructive. I think many other aspects of the past diplomacy, particularly by Europe, were quite constructive. And I think particularly the offer of normalizing relations and of putting positive incentives on the table in exchange for a forthcoming Iranian response on enrichment is quite productive. One thing, though, that if you read the fine print of the offer that was tabled by Europe in 2008, it said, look, we're willing to talk about normalizing relations. We're willing to talk about giving you fuel cycle guarantees and so forth. But none of those talks can even start until you suspend enrichment. And for that, that was sort of a poison pill for Iran. Whether it was intended that way or not, I don't know. But Iran had made very clear by that time that they weren't going to stop doing the thing which was the very object of the talks before they even started talks about whether it should stop or not. They weren't going to prejudge the outcome of the talks by suspending enrichment first. And so that was essentially the Bush administration position, right? We won't talk to you until you suspend enrichment. Well, Europe said, well, we'll talk to you around the edges, but we won't talk to you really about until you suspend enrichment. The whole question is now really whether Iran must suspend enrichment in order to have any kind of a long-term settlement with the West on the nuclear question. And that's the fundamental question. That's what the Obama administration has to resolve.
Okay,
and we should talk about that.
The issue of suspending enrichment, I see this as being almost a red herring that's kind of getting everybody all distracted. My position, my view, is that the suspension of enrichment should not be a precondition for talks. It's just silly. Diplomacy should be able to unfold. People should sit down across from each other and talk. And if the centrifuges are spinning at Natanz, so be it. The purpose of diplomacy is to resolve the future of those centrifuges and figure out what role they have to play in a nuclear Iran. So I agree with you entirely. It's just a silly precondition, and I'm glad the Bush administration is over and we can move on with our lives in this respect.
But now comes the real question. Okay, we're going to talk. We're going to talk without preconditions. The question is, what do we say in those talks? And in particular, what is our fundamental ask? Do we go back to asking Iran to promise to suspend enrichment at the end of the talks? Or do we acknowledge that we're willing to explore some option that allows some form of enrichment in Iran, perhaps as part of a multinational consortium with the additional protocol thrown in, with all these safeguards which Iran has said is on the table in the context of enriching in Iran. One thing you got to understand, by the way, and I think this is really, and it goes back to this question of intention, is people have to understand why it might be that Iran would want to enrich uranium if, even though they don't have an
reactor to put the uranium in?
A whole bunch of reactors, right.
Right. So why would Iran want to enrich uranium if it doesn't have a reactor for their uranium?
And from the response of the non-proliferation community has invariably been, this is the gotcha moment. There's no economic justification for enrichment, therefore you must be pursuing a weapon. And what's interesting is that there is a whole other set of observers out there who are sort of overlooked in this discussion, people who actually know Iran and who study Iran, who have a very different perspective.
So what's their view?
And their view is that this has really become, for Iran, not only just for hardcore conservatives, but for reformers across the entire spectrum of Iranian society, this has become a matter of national pride. Not only technological pride, we can do this, can do our moon landing, but pride in their refusal to be cowed. This goes back to a generation ago, in 1953. Western pressure trying to force Iran to submit and continuing to enrich is a way of them saying we will not submit. It's not only a symbolic thing for them, but it's also a response to Supreme Leader Khamenei's concern that look, if you capitulate to Western pressure, they're just going to make more demands. The demands will never stop. They will never actually give you anything. They're just going to make more demands if they see any weakness.
See, I just have to say, I have a huge
enrichment has
respect.
become this symbolic thing there. And I'm not saying that I can prove that that's their motive. It may be that they have a disguised program. I'm just saying is it prevents us from being, those of us who really try to study the evidence carefully in a holistic perspective, it prevents us from being so sure that the only explanation for why they are enriching is that they're pursuing a weapon.
Okay, but just step back for 1 second. I have a huge amount of respect for Iran experts. Enormous. But this feels a little forced to me. I mean, we're expected to believe that the reason Iran is so determined to separate U-235 from U-238 isotopes is to prove to the world its scientific capabilities, and it just happened to choose this as opposed to, say, stem cell research or some other cutting-edge form of scientific work that could advance human progress and understanding. I mean, why fissile material? It just feels a little fake to me, this rationale. I don't know.
Well, they didn't go. There's a history to Iran's nuclear program that goes all the way back to the Shah.
Yes.
That was, and they don't have a history of stem cell research that goes all the way back to the Shah. I mean, they have an industry.
But Iran has a proud history of scientific accomplishment, and why this? Why now? I mean, Iran has this enormous oil and gas industry that needs development. So, not that area?
Right. Well, they obviously want to develop the oil and gas industry. The United States has done a great deal to try to...
but they've put a huge roadblock in the way of developing their oil and gas industry.
Right. Well, from the standpoint of commercial interest, they're not acting in their own commercial interest. And,
so you acknowledge that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they may feel that they're... I mean, one thing that is clear is that nuclear reactors may make sense for Iran, even though they have a lot of oil and gas, because oil and gas is their source of foreign exchange, right? So any gallon of oil and gas that is burned up in Iran is a bunch of dollars lost on world oil markets. So it would be in their interest to develop a domestic nuclear power program to displace oil and gas for export. And people need to understand that. Whether that's actually their motive or not, I don't know, but it's not at all implausible.
My understanding is that there's huge waste in Iran's domestic gas consumption, and right. Anyway, but
right. But the real question is not do we trust Iran? Because at the American Foreign Policy Project, our findings are not based on trust. Our findings are based on the need to verify and the need to get a window onto the entire picture of nuclear activities in Iran, and that means getting them to rejoin the additional protocol and accept other safeguards. And for us, that is more important than this.
Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room that people always debate about: sanctions. What role should sanctions play in bringing about Iran's adherence to the additional protocol or whatever? What's your take on the sanctions?
Well, the track record for them isn't very great, right? If you look at the GAO report in 2007, basically their report was that there are some tactical successes, but no sign of strategic success. They have inflicted some pain on Iran, but there's no evidence that they've actually moderated Iran's behavior or changed it in any productive way. And in fact, they probably entrenched it.
Right.
And so then the question is, well, if we just tighten the thumb screws down tighter, can we really force them to their knees?
Right.
And the answer, quite clearly, in our view, is just no. It's not a question of morality.
So then, where does that leave the international? Where does that leave you?
Well, it leaves us with the need for diplomacy. We think that you're much more likely to make progress with Iran through positive diplomacy. Our main leverage over Iran is the positive things that we can withhold. Help in developing their oil and gas fields, giving them a place at the table in the region, which they really want, and which we actually need them to play anyway, and normalization of relations and end to threats. That's what they need and want. But if you put them into a siege mode, where it's a test of wills, you can't play that positive leverage. And one of the real questions is do you really enhance diplomacy by a carrots and sticks strategy that makes the carrots more appetizing by brandishing the sticks? And our view is that doesn't help at all. In fact, it's self-nullifying. You don't have the pain caused by the sticks just totally nullifies the appeal of the carrots. And you end up with a self-canceling policy, not an enhancing policy.
Well, here's the thing.
All these measures to promote sanctions are really self-defeating.
I mean, my instinct is to agree with you entirely and say, yes, it should all take place in an atmosphere of completely positive atmosphere of love and mutual respect and understanding and all of that. But what I come back to, and it's just frustrating, and and sanctions are a complex issue. I'm not loving sanctions. Sanctions are not a one size fits all silver bullet to solve this problem by any means. I thought that GAO report you referred to was really excellent in pointing out the limitations of sanctions in this case. But I do think that the Security Council needs something that it can turn to short of war, short of use of military force, and beyond total capitulation to try to make clear, to sharpen choices. And so I believe that there is a role for sanctions when they come into play. I think that that's a matter of debate. Certainly now at this stage, I would agree with those who call for suspending sanctions temporarily while talks get underway, suspending the requirement for enrichment, just to stop enrichment. I would certainly agree with all of that. But to your point about Iran. Doesn't want to be pushed against the wall. What I'm curious about is your take on sort of the last 4 to 6 weeks. We've seen the Obama administration extend an olive branch, so to speak, with Iran, saying we're going to join the diplomatic process as a full participant. And we had that Nowruz greeting that President Obama issued, and what has come back from us? From Iran to us, it's been a lot of static and a lot of mixed messages, and not sort of friendly, open. What's your take on it? Maybe I have it all wrong.
I think that what came back after the Nowruz speech is basically a response that talk is cheap. What matters to us is actions. And they're still waiting to see what the Obama administration's actions are going to be. Let me say, by the way, that I don't accept the characterization of our position as one of favoring love.
Okay, I didn't mean to be glib.
It's just a question of what works. What is going to be most effective in accomplishing our objectives in a hard-headed. And in our view, the people who are being naive are really the people who think that you can somehow squeeze Iran into submitting with the leverage that is now available to us, which is much less than the negative leverage anyway that we had 7 years ago when the Bush administration came in. What's really on the table now, the one way that you might really cause some pain in Iran is with an embargo on refined petroleum products to Iran. And that is the subject of a bill, as you know, that was just introduced yesterday, H.R. 1985, in the House, which basically called on the president to sanction any firms that do anything to help Iran develop its petroleum supplies and do anything and that ship refined petroleum products to Iran. And the theory here is that
see, I thought that there already were sanctions on firms U.S. unilateral sanctions on firms. I already thought that was prohibited, but.
I'm not sure how much that part adds, but clearly the ban on exporting petroleum products, it doesn't just apply to U.S. firms. I believe it applies to
right. Well, all these firms are so multinational now.
So the question is, can you bring Iran to heel by imposing a petroleum embargo on their refined petroleum products? It is true that they depend on imports for about 30% of their domestic consumption, and that has really whetted the appetite of the hawks for some kind of effort to embargo gasoline exports to Iran. And we looked at this very, very carefully in the group and looked at some reports done by oil industry consultants. And basically, our perspective on this is that our judgment is that this is really a losing strategy for a couple of reasons. First, Iran has already instituted a rationing system that will make sure that any shortfalls are not felt by the military, are not felt by the government, are not felt by the elites. They're felt by the ordinary people of Iran, and they will blame the West for their pain. They won't blame their own leaders, they will rally around the nuclear program that's supported across the country. It's a very popular program, whether you like it or not. Right. So that's one problem. And the second problem, even greater, is that this legislation shows a complete ignorance of the structure of world oil markets. There are thousands of suppliers who are willing to step up and ship oil to Iran if the existing handful of suppliers turn out to cave to Western sanctions. Well, Hugo Chavez's refineries alone are more than able to completely break the embargo single-handedly, unless we also impose a naval blockade to keep the ships from reaching Iran, and that would be an act of hot war, not just an act of economic war. So that is not a very promising strategy. And what it will do is basically completely undermine any notion of constructive diplomacy with Iran. That's really a declaration of economic war. So what's the point of having a Nowruz message if you're going to do something like that?
Well, the Nowruz message is from the president.
You have to have a coherent strategy. Either you're a good cop or you're a bad cop. But for goodness sake, don't be a little of both and then expect to succeed.
Well, wait. I think Iran is smart enough to understand the separation of powers in the United States and know, when members of Congress introduce legislation for their own political purposes and domestic constituency, and when the President of the United States is speaking as Commander-in-Chief and, our elected leader. So I trust Iran to understand the distinction between those two things.
Oh, yeah, I'm not worried about the legislation, only the policy. If it were to become U.S. policy, that would be much more problematic.
Maybe in our last couple minutes we should shift to the issue of Israel, which also in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks has, I think, more loudly than usual been communicating its concern about Iran and what it might choose to do should diplomacy not go the way we hope it does over the next, say, 6 months. So, do you have any thoughts about Israel's?
You go first this time. What do you think?
Well, my view is that Israel is not going to strike militarily at Iran's nuclear facilities. That having been said, I don't think Iran. I think that decision. I think that they very carefully sort of are evaluating this all the time. But in the absence of a decision militarily to go forward, politically their goal is to persuade Iran that they could do it at any time, and kind of keep Iran, use that as sort of a leverage over Iran's behavior. And I think to good effect. I mean, I think the thought that Israel could send some planes up in the air and damage 2 to 4 nuclear facilities is sobering. And I happen to think they won't do it, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop threatening to do it.
Yeah. I think if there's anything that really empowers the hardliners in Iran more than anything else, it's the constant military threats, first from the Bush administration and now to Israel.
But the Bush administration put the brakes on what Israel wanted to do, right?
That's
so
right.
We have to give the Bush administration credit for that.
Give Secretary Gates credit back in the summer of 2008 for putting the brakes on that. Absolutely right. So when I said first the Bush administration, I was really talking about much earlier than that, before grown-ups came into power in the Bush administration. But it is kind of ironic, right? On the one hand, we say that Iran doesn't need and shouldn't pursue nuclear weapons. On the other hand, we say that Israel, has the right to, which has nuclear weapons, has the right to attack Iran. It's certainly not a straightforward diplomatic point. But the main problem is the question of whether this would work. And every scenario that I've seen, this is another scenario that has no exit strategy.
Right.
People who advocate this have no answer to the question, what happens then?
Right.
And unfortunately, we've seen Israel do this in Lebanon and do this in Gaza, and we see that they're capable of doing military strikes without a clear exit strategy. And unfortunately, they want to do this again. But let's be clear in our own mind that nobody will be fooled if Israel strikes Iran as to who's behind this. People know where Israel's planes and where Israel's money come from. So our interests will be hurt. And let's not forget
let's also be clear that an Israeli strike against Iranian nuclear facilities will do really very little to set back Iran's nuclear program. It will damage, superficially, some buildings. Buildings can be rebuilt, equipment can be replaced, people can be retrained. Right. It's not going to do more than set things back by, a few years at most.
You can't bomb knowledge. All you can do, all bombing will do is actually, if there was any doubt in Iran or any debate about whether it will end that debate.
It will end that debate instantly. It will drive the program underground. Iran will have a bomb.
Towards nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Right,
so
right. It's totally self-defeating.
Yeah. But by the way, that's why I think Israel won't do it. But that doesn't mean they won't continue to threaten to do it.
Right.
So
I think that is the key question. I think that anybody who is watching the Iran debate should look for in the Obama administration's approach to this question, because the Obama administration has a wide variety of viewpoints within it. Some favoring moderation, some favoring a much more hawkish approach. One of the strengths of the administration is that they have this diversity of perspective, and it's a credit to the president that he's done that. But there is a tendency, whenever you have this domestic divergence of opinion, to try to resolve differences by giving each side something. Give the hawks some ratcheted up sanctions and some hostile rhetoric from the Secretary of State, if not the President, and give the doves, an offer to talk and interesting concessions and so forth. And there is a danger that the result of that will be a domestic situation that is nice, but a foreign policy that just doesn't work, that's incoherent, that's too aggressive to really be diplomatic, and yet not aggressive enough to really be threatening. And so, I guess from my perspective, it's important to have a coherent strategy more than anything else. You've got to decide which you are, and then be consistent about it. And this doesn't mean unilaterally lifting sanctions, and all sanctions, including the existing sanctions. I mean, I guess my view is that the existing sanctions that are there now are sort of the backdrop against which negotiations proceed. They're not really a provocation. It's the new sanctions that this administration is responsible for, that will send a signal that is provocative or not. And if you're not sure which approach to take, And again, the question is, how do you respond to uncertainty? If you're not sure which approach to take, what strategy makes sense? And it seems to us that it's the diplomatic strategy that makes sense in the face of uncertainty, because if that fails, you can always go back to a confrontational approach later on. But if you try a confrontational approach and then get nowhere, then you don't look principled. You just look weak.
Well, we don't have any evidence right now that the Obama administration is considering coming in heavy with big-time oil and gas sanctions. I mean, that's not been talked about.
No, I'm not saying that. I don't. So far as I know, a decision hasn't been made what to do about Iran. And short of an oil embargo, there's many forms of confrontation and negative leverage short of that might be used. So I think that the two things to look for are what will be their negotiating demands, and what tactics are they going to use to back those up? Do they contemplate some form of enrichment in Iran with suitable quid pro quos, or do they return to the old demand that you have to stop enrichment, not as a precondition, but down the road you have to stop enrichment?
Before we leave this topic, I just want to mention one thing on this issue. The United States has partners in these talks. And believe it or not, it may come as a surprise to some people that France in particular is pretty far to the right of the United States on the question of whether Iran should have any enrichment capability. So it isn't really only for the United States to decide how, if any, kind of enrichment it remains. France is hardcore opposed to any enrichment in Iran. And Britain, I don't think it's too far behind. So that is also another thing that we'll have to understand. Absolutely.
And the United States is not alone in this. We have to reach a decision with our allies, and certainly our allies' beliefs have to be taken into account. We talked about it in the group, and our thought was, they see what's worked and what doesn't work as well. The new administration, should just sit down with our allies and talk it over, have a candid exchange of views, and jointly come up with a solution that is more likely to work. We think this is more likely to work, and that our allies will see that. And Russia and China, I think, will certainly be much more supportive of this approach than they have been of the old, more confrontational approach.
Right. Well, I before we wrap things up, is there any closing thought you want to leave? People should read our respective papers.
They should read our respective papers. Yeah. This is a counterintuitive area to work in. The instinct, whenever you face a threatening or a fearful prospect, is to stand and fight and to confront. And sometimes it actually takes more courage to bargain than to shoot at anything that moves, either economically or politically. So you have to look carefully at the evidence. You have to avoid being stampeded into hasty conclusions. You have to think about what you know and don't know. You have to form policies that are rational responses to uncertainty, and that have a good chance of success, whether or not they feel intuitive or not. I guess that's our point.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty good to me. Even if we don't always agree on the fine point, I think that's a very positive and constructive note on which to end our discussion.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Take care.